Okay. So next we have dissociative disorders, right? Dissociative disorders. We are only going to talk about one, right? Dissociative disorder. There are others, but for the test, you just need to know this one dissociative disorder, dissociative identity disorder, or DID, dissociative identity disorder. Now, this used to be called multiple personality disorder, right? But this is dissociative identity disorder today, right? That's what we call it, DID. So this is where you have more than one personality manifesting in the same individual. Now, so don't confuse, schizophrenia is not multiple personalities, right? Now, once again, the paranoid schizophrenic might think that, he is Napoleon, but there's just one identity there, right, for that person. Dissociative identity disorder, you got multiple personalities, right, in the same person. So that's dissociative identity disorder. I'll try to call it DID, because that's what it will be on the test. Dissociative identity disorder used to be called multiple personality disorder, right? So there was a big case. Well, there have been several big cases, right, about multiple personality disorder in history. It's a very rare disorder. Right, very rare disorder, but then it became popularized in the 1970s. Right, there was this case. They show these three faces of Eve. I mean, there have been movies made, right, with multiple personality disorder. There's a case of Sybil, right, where the psychiatrist wrote a book and a TV movie got made on it. It really popularized the notion of dissociative identity disorder. And oh, what do you know? After this stuff spread the word on dissociative identity disorder, all of a sudden more people are being diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. Right? That goes back to the old conflict we mentioned at the beginning of the book. Are we, do these people really have it? Or is it that the people who treat them want to have a case and so diagnose it? And if you look at the case of Sybil, that psychiatrist that got another writer to help her write the book initially, and then they made that TV movie out of it in the 70s. That psychiatrist, she had always wanted to have a case. She had always wanted to have a patient with dissociative identity disorder, right? So there's some skepticism that's still around on dissociative identity disorder. Usually, once again, there are always exceptions. We're talking about generally speaking, but usually it goes, right? The person with dissociative identity disorder usually experienced abuse in childhood, right? Usually experienced abuse in childhood, physical and or sexual abuse in childhood. And so as a way to start coping with that abuse, repetitive abuse that you cannot escape, you do what children normally do, right? You pretend to play. You pretend you're someone else, right? And that doesn't have to live with that abuse. So it's thought that, yeah, you have these very severe circumstances where the individual starts to escape or cope with those negative things in his or her life by creating new personalities that don't have to deal with all that baggage and all that terrible stuff, right? So, and even as adults, we have a tendency to engage in pretend play, right? The weekend warrior, let's go to the paintball and do that, or whatever it might be, laser tag, right? So we humans just have this ability to pretend to play, pretend we're someone else to escape, right? Now imagine this happening very early in life, right? Repeated, inescapable abuse. So you start to pretend you're someone else that doesn't have to deal with that. And over time, you start to develop more personalities. So it's a way of coping with those terrible circumstances, and you end up eventually with multiple personalities, although the diagnosis is dissociative identity disorder, right? And so, yeah, they mentioned in there, I think, a case of, the Hillside Strangler, Kenneth Bianchi, trying to pretend, right? He had multiple personality disorder. It was called that at the time when he was caught, right? So he could be found not guilty by reason of insanity. Well, that didn't work. That did not work, right? Because what the therapist did with him is just very nonchalantly in a session mention that, oh, well, usually these patients have this, or and then miraculously in the next session with the guy, he'd have that symptom too, right? So he was pretending. so anyway, so you can catch those who try to pretend, right? But watch some of the videos that are in the PowerPoint slides on dissociative identity disorder, and make a decision for yourself. With all these things, I tend to fall on the skeptical side of things, but it does make sense to me if you have someone starting in childhood with inescapable abuse happening, that it makes sense that they'd start to create different personalities that wouldn't have to deal with that. So the story of it makes some sense, but perhaps we're overdiagnosing, and that's a general criticism that we mentioned at the beginning of this chapter. Maybe we're pathologizing everyday life. The patient might start to exhibit some of these symptoms, and they get more attention from the therapist by exhibiting these symptoms, and so they keep going as a way to get the therapist more help, more attention, right? So anyway, but that's one of the more controversial disorders, dissociative identity disorder.